All right, well, we're continuing on with Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, our brother Suzuki's writing. In my opinion, one of the most helpful books I've read on spiritual practice in a long time. And, that Vedantic perspective of Buddhism, Sri Ramakrishna is quoted as saying in The Great Master that Buddhism and the path of knowledge are the same. So even though we're studying Buddhism, we're really studying Vedanta. So it's there. You don't even have to work at seeing the unity of religion. You can see it quite clearly. So this chapter is called Study Yourself. And, if you sit there and contemplate that, that's really all you can ever study. Since everything is an aspect of yourself. We've talked about that we live in mind and not in a world. And whose mind is it we live in? It's your mind that you're living in. And so if you study anything, you're only studying mind. You're only studying your own mind. Because all external, quote, all external stimulus is assumed. As a matter of fact, Sri Nisargadatta says that anything you place outside yourself is just something you don't understand fully. And those things that you say are inside yourself are things that you believe yourself to understand fully. So I thought that was a very interesting way of describing the internal and external world. Because Sri Nisargadatta says, and actually most of the scriptures of the Enlightenment folks say that ultimately that there is no internal and external. It's all internal. This world is within you. So our famous quote by Swamiji, right? I am not in Alameda, Alameda is in me. So study yourself, a very broad topic. His little verb at the beginning, to have some deep feeling about Buddhism is not the point. We just do what we should do, like eating supper and going to bed. This is Buddhism. Yeah, so what he's saying there is we live according to nature. We live spontaneously there in the morning, and that it's not about generating a spiritual mood or a spiritual reassurance or a spiritual depth. It's not about those things. Anything that you can sense, anything that you can enjoy, anything that you can focus on is not the point of our spiritual practice. That this spiritual realization does not happen because of mind or any relationship of thinking. And so it's not a matter of study, it's not a matter of philosophy, it's not a matter of learning. It's a matter of surrender and letting go so that which is obvious can become apparent. In my favorite words of Swami Tattvamayinanda. So the purpose of studying Buddhism is not to study Buddhism, but to study ourselves. Indeed, I think you could broaden that right up. The purpose of spiritual life is the study of self, which in the ultimate is the study of the divine, the study and knowledge of isness. It is impossible to study ourselves without some teaching. If you want to know what water is, you need science, and the scientist needs a laboratory. In the laboratory, there are various ways in which to study what water is. Thus, it is possible to know what kind of elements water has, the various forms it takes, and its nature. But it is impossible thereby to know water in itself. It is the same thing with us. We need some teaching, but just by studying the teaching alone, it is impossible to know what I, in myself, am. Through the teaching, we may understand our human nature. But the teaching is not we ourselves. It is some explanation of ourselves. So if you are attached to the teaching or to the teacher, that is a big mistake. So this study of something as it is within itself, I think in my 1 year of college philosophy, Kant makes a big deal of that he says that a thing in itself cannot be known. There's no way for us to know that You know, this table, you can describe this table according to your senses, according to your perceptions, but what the table actually is in and of itself, not according to the reading of a sense or an idea or a projection, what it is in and of itself cannot be known. And you know, it's very much like the movie screen behind the movie. You know, as long as the movie's playing, you can't really see the screen or know it, and so its nature remains hidden. And you know, this projection of an external world, what it is in and of itself, it's like trying to study a subject in the mirror. You know, you can see it in the mirror, and you can study it in the mirror and learn lots of things about it in the mirror, but you can't study the thing itself because the mirror is just the reflection of the object. And so it's like that. In this world, anything that we study, it's just a reflection of consciousness on mind. And the thing in and of itself is going to remain a mystery. We cannot plumb the depths of an external thing. There's no thing there. And the more you study, this goes back to Swamiji's statement about sand on the beach. You can pick up a grain of sand and you can study that for the rest of your life. And at the end of your life, you will have more questions about that piece of sand than you had when you started. That's the nature of the thing in itself. We can study the reflections in mind, but the thing in itself we cannot know. So he says, the moment you meet a teacher, you should leave the teacher, and you should be independent. You need a teacher so that you can become independent. If you are not attached to him, the teacher will show you the way to yourself. You have a teacher for yourself, not for the teacher. This is an interesting idea because, you know, in Vedanta, we have this idea of the guru, but it's important not to be attached to your guru, not to be identified by your guru. You know, this is not a pet peeve because it doesn't bother me that much at all. But one of the things that I find sometimes unsettling is people running around wanting to know who each other's guru is, because it shows a distinct lack of faith. There's a singular guru, and that divine guru is your guru. Thakur is your guru, Ma is your guru, Swamiji is your guru. You know, your chosen ideal is your guru. Your earthly guru is not your guru. He is the face of Thakur for you in this moment. That was one of the first lessons I learned, because, you know, I took initiation from Pravrajika Moksha Prana, and then I joined the order and they wanted me to take another initiation because it wasn't good for a sannyasin to have a female guru that I would have to go visit in a convent as a sannyasin, that would break some rather distinct rules. And so I went, they wanted me to go talk to Moksha Prana about it, about being reinitiated. So I went to see her in Dakshineshwar at the convent there, and I told her that the order wanted me to take reinitiation. And she smiled, and I said, "Is there a problem? I don't want another guru." She said to me, "You are not changing gurus. There is only one guru. You are changing faces, and only faces. You have my blessing. Go and change the face of your guru."
Maharaj, I have a question, and it's kind of it's bothering me because people, those who are on the path of devotion, and Thakur and Ma, that's what I am attached to. And from morning till night, like whatever I do, the way I think, it's always, how do I mean, I don't want to get rid of that, because it's like
no, there's a secret. There's two ways to get rid of it. One is to pull out, and that's the one you don't want to do, the one to pull away and say, no, I can't be attached. The other way is be deeply attached, but learn who they are. Where can you turn that Thakur is not? Who can you meet that is not the Divine Mother? So expand your understanding through your devotion and see Mother in all things, see Thakur in all things, and be deeply attached, but be attached to everything equally.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Yeah, we'll take one ideal and put it in the other. But that's, Swami Prabhupada shared that sort of in a related way when he was talking about the difference between a householder life and a monastic life. He says, they're both are paths, and they're both necessary. And he said the difference is, he says, for the monk, he pushes everything arm's distance away, renounces everything, and then slowly brings everything back at the same level. So he pushes his mother, his father, his brothers, his sisters, his friends, his lovers, all back. And then he brings everybody forward equally as his lover, as his brother, as his sister, and maintains that unity that way. And that's how he breaks his attachment or her attachment. And for the householder, he says that it's a slow expansion, that at first you're attached just to yourself, and yourself is king, and you run your world according to your own whim. He says, and then you get married, and now you have to compromise. Now your world is a world of two, and you have to include that other person in your egoistic perspective of the universe. And then perhaps you have children. So you add 1, 2, 3, 14, 20, who knows, and expand your sense of self to include all of your family. And then they get married and they have children, and you expand even more. And they have friends and they have neighbors, and you have acquaintances and friends. And the householder continually expands his sense of self or herself to include everybody. So you see, that's just the description of two separate paths. And so with bhakti, it's that way. Bhakti, you love God deeply, you get deeply attached, you just throw everything you've got in there. But then you begin to see God in everything. You begin to worship God in all things. Everything that you do becomes worship. Every person you meet becomes the divine presence. And you expand bit by bit by bit by bit by bit until your ego has encompassed the whole. I had that conversation. That was one of my first early conversations with Prabhupada, because I went to him and told him I thought Vedanta was selfish. I said, all I do is sit in a monastery and feed myself and try and enjoy this spiritual bliss. And I go to the shrine and I do my practice for my enlightenment. And I talk about the good of the world, but what good of the world do? I wash dishes and wash toilets and, weed gardens. What good am I to the world? And, he smiled rather wryly at me, and he said, yes, it's true. Vedanta is very selfish. But you see, what you need to do is expand your sense of self to include everything, and then be as selfish as you like. So that's the trick of how we deal with that. We constantly expand our sense of self to include everything. Or in the bhakti perspective, we expand our idea of the beloved so that we see him or her in everything and worship everything and harvest that richness of living, actually, to have all of that love obvious and apparent. So he's definitely telling us that we need a teacher, but keep that teacher inside. Understand that the inner guru is what Thakur is awakening. And when that inner guru awakens, you will understand, oh my goodness, Thakur's in there. He's teaching me in there. And then you begin to see that, oh my, he's teaching everybody in there. And oh my, it just keeps getting more and more intimate. So if you are attached to a teacher or to a teaching, that is a big mistake. Yes, initially. We have to keep an open mind all the time, even about our own practices and our own religions. I'm learning something. We do that class, Vedic Christianity. And I chose that title not to be provocative, but to enjoy its provocative nature, really. I was hoping it would start some conversations. And you know what I was expecting? I was expecting to get all of these fundamentalist Christians all up in arms and getting all upset about it. I have to say, I've been rudely awakened and shocked by the fact that it's the Hindus who are insisting on their autonomy and their specialness and their separateness from Christianity. I never expected that. I came into Vedanta through Thakur, and so it's just always been this wide open, beautiful, all-inclusive philosophy, and I just assumed that was the nature of it. And I tell you now, 5 times online, I've been drawn into rather sharp discussions about my cultural appropriation of Hinduism, which which I love. What a great conversation. But and for the first time this week, actually, I had someone ask a question instead of attacking the idea immediately by listing out their ideas of the superiority of the Vedas and the impossibility of there being anything in common with Christianity. That this week, for the first time, someone just asked me a question. Why do you use the word Vedic with Christianity for your class? I wrote back and just praised him to the stars. I said, how beautiful to get a reasonable question finally, where somebody just wants to know and is investigating. That is the difference between a religious person and a spiritual person. A spiritual person will see something that offends them or hurts them, and they'll ask a question. They'll investigate. They'll go in to find more. The religious person will get offended and react from that offense. That's the attachment to guru, the attachment to religion. And it causes...
Maharaj,
Yes.
It's the fanatics that just like, fanatics in other religion, there are fanatics in Hindus too.
You're right. That's a very good lesson. You're absolutely right. Every religion has their fanatics. And those and fanatics are a category within religion, not within a religion. So it's good to know. And the reason that they're, just as a side note, do you remember how Thakur tells us to escape that, or how Vivekananda in Bhakti Yoga tells us how to escape that? Anyone? He tells you to escape it by keeping your Advaitic understanding tied in the corner of your dhoti. What is our Advaitic understanding? That the ultimate truth is God alone exists. All else is unreal. And so maintaining that idea of unity as the fundamental truth of the universe, that's how we temper our temptation to become fanatical, especially in bhakti. Because in bhakti, everybody wants to believe that their partner is the most beautiful partner or the most handsome partner. And it's not a bad thing. You should believe that. It's a very healthy thing to believe. But then you should just know, because of your Advaita, that everybody sees their partner as the most beautiful partner. And so you celebrate that. God is infinite, so he can be everybody's favorite. So Rinzai, an early Chinese Zen master, analyzed how to teach his disciples in 4 ways. Sometimes he talked about the disciple himself. Sometimes he talked about the teaching itself. Sometimes he gave an interpretation of the disciple or the teaching. And finally, sometimes he did not give any instruction at all to his disciples. He knew that even without being given any instruction, a student is a student. Strictly speaking, there is no need to teach the student, because the student himself is Buddha, even though he may not be aware of it. And even though he is aware of his true nature, if he is attached to this awareness, that is already wrong. When he is not aware of it, he has everything. But when he becomes aware of it, he thinks that he is aware of that what he is aware of is himself, which is a big mistake. Right? Why is he calling that a big mistake? Because to have anything other is to be in a state of egoism, right? And if we feed that notion of separateness, if we feed that notion of difference, we're feeding ego. We're feeding our problem. We're increasing our ignorance. So the 4 ways of teaching, it's interesting. 1 is to focus on the student himself, to go inside, look within, see the gems that lie before the gate to your inner shrine, as Thakur says. And then there's the study of the word, or the study of the teaching and the scriptures, the philosophy, that help us to see the truth of things, that help us in our discernment, help us to dismantle difference, help us to identify unity through virtue. And then there's the what's the third one? The teaching. Sometimes about the disciple, sometimes about the teaching, sometimes you give interpretation of the disciple or the teaching. Okay, so that's, yeah, that's doing your commentary. That's adding your stories and your personal experience. And then the third one is no teaching at all, which is probably the most powerful form of teaching. I used to go and talk to Swami Damodarananda when I was in Bellarmat in India for those few months. And every night we'd go sit in his room. And, you know, he lived in Ramana Maharshi's ashrama for 2 years before he became a monk. Actually, he went there to join. And Ramana Maharshi told him, no, you can stay here and it'd be good for you to stay here for a while, but I am not your teacher. I am not your guru. And so he was there for 2 years. And he says consistently, you know, he'd be doing his chores and he would keep a little notebook to write down his questions as they occurred to him when he was doing his work. Yeah. And so he would sit there and make this list of questions. And then in the evening, when he would go and sit in the presence of Ramana Maharshi, his intention, he said, was always to ask his list of questions. And he said that every time that he went to Ramana Maharshi's presence and sat down, that the questions just flew out of his mind. They just seemed absurd. Like, what was the necessity of that? You know, just that noise. And he would just sit in fullness in the presence of Ramana Maharshi, who taught in silence. You know, if the teacher is sitting there knowing that you are the Buddha, knowing and seeing your divine self, even though you haven't realized it yet, just the power of that holy presence, knowing who you are, and teaching you and talking to you and treating you as who you are, is powerful. There's no teaching necessary. It's an acknowledgement of what is, right? It's a wonderful thing. And, you know, Vivekananda is always so rich when he talks about that. Who are we to teach another? Who are we to tolerate another? Who are we to, you know, accept another? He says, you know, that there's no ego there, and ego is necessary for all of those activities. So always work for pure openness, pure oneness, seeing the divine in the eyes of everyone. When you do not hear anything from the teacher, but just sit, this is called teaching without teaching. That's sitting in that divine presence, in that silence. And, you know, quite often I talk about, you know, oh, I learned this when I was sitting in the shrine this day or that day. And it's always such a weird thing to talk about because I never really know how to talk about that stuff because I don't really understand all that stuff. But certainly when you want to know something, when you're troubled by something, really and truly, the best way to deal with that is to go sit with it in the shrine in front of your ideal, you know, whatever that might be. But in silence, just hold that space within, have your question there, just sitting. Don't repeat it, don't even talk about it. Just sit with it and the divine in silence. And, you know, I think, I imagine that it's a common experience, that it will resolve. That's why that whole idea of Maya untying the knots in the presence of awareness. So if you need something, you know, if something's troubling you, if you don't know something, or the faith is shaky, or if you don't understand something, or you don't know what you should do with your husband, or how you should resolve the problem with your wife, or, you know, what's going on with your child, go and sit in silence in the shrine, and you'll find that you have those answers already. You know, that they need to just manifest, and to manifest, you just need to be quiet so that they can float to the top, as it were, so Mother can hand you those answers. So when you do not hear anything from the teacher, but just sit, this is called teaching without teaching. But sometimes this is not sufficient, so we listen to lectures and have discussions, right? That's a matter of disposition, actually. Sometimes we sit and we just can't get our minds quiet. You know, I was struggling with that this morning. And I don't really understand. It wasn't anything in particular that was distracting me this morning. It was just a sense of me that was distracting me. It was an odd feeling. it's very difficult, you know. Last night I wanted to share that. It's kind of a weird thing to mention, but you know, I was laying in bed and I was thinking about life and the divine and my condition, which is always the wrong thing for me to think about. But laying there thinking about it, and you know, some of that inner pain that we have, some of that deep down stuff, you know, was there. And I remember just kind of going in there and just telling myself in my most sober voice, which means I tried to unify as much of myself into that silence as I could. And I told myself, you know, the grace of God is real. And I just kept telling myself that the grace of God is real. And each time that I said it, I tried to understand and tried to be more absent in my ego each time it was said, so that it became more meaningful and more powerful. And what a delight. I mean, what a beautiful calmness came. And then of course that joy of understanding that, wow, this infinite grace, which is a concept that we use all the time, is not a concept. It's the nature that of what we're both basting in life. It's the nature of the universe. And when you begin to understand that the nature of the universe around you is an infinite grace and support of you, what a power there is in that to grow. What a power there is in that to overcome and to win, in the sense of becoming the pea. Even if you've fallen into a pit of filth, like Thakur says, a pea still becomes a pea plant. And that's how we do it. We begin to know the nature of the universe, and that's how we become fearless. And ultimately, that's how we find our freedom, how we remember our freedom. All right. Sometimes this is not sufficient, so we listen to lectures and have discussions. But we should remember that the purpose of practice in a particular place is to study ourselves. That's what we're trying to understand. That's why religion is not religion. You know, it's been perverted into a separate thing from life. But religion and life are one and the same. We're born into a condition that we don't understand and that we know nothing about. And so religion is the quest to know, what am I? What is this? What is the relationship between this and that, this seeming that? And so we go inside. You know, initially the rishis went outside, just like science is going outside. Initially, they went outside and tried to study the material world to come up with their answers. And not that there was anything wrong with that, but they said it wasn't effective, because for every question they answered in the outside world, there were 5 more questions behind it. And so it kept proliferating. Their ignorance kept proliferating. The more that they knew of the material world, the less they knew. And the more, you know, and I've seen that in my life. How many times in my life has physics made the announcement they found a new particle? How many new, you know, finally they find the God particle. And I think they've already found like 2 or 3 more beyond the God particle. You know, it's like, well, okay, how long should I sit here waiting, you know, for the ultimate particle, which then turns out not to be a particle? Or, well, it's sort of a particle. It depends on whether you're looking at it or not. So I'm not making fun of science. Science is important and beautiful. It makes me laugh. So this thing is that understanding that we're going within. Thakur says, go within, dive deep within your own self and find the gems that are laying there outside the shrine of your heart, out at the center of your being, that you are the bottleneck of everything. The whole universe meets in you. The entirety of the past and the entirety projection of the projected future is all here in you at this moment. And all of them are fully accessible to you. The macrocosm and the microcosm are one. And so, yes, step into this study of yourself and find out that that is no small subject. that is the one way of answering everything. So, We should remember that the purpose of practice in a particular place is to study ourselves. Now, why do you say the purpose of our practice in a particular place? It means it's his way of saying ego. As long as we believe ourselves to be a particular of any kind, in this example, a particular place, anytime we find that we're in that state of particularity, it's time to go in and study ourselves, because that is a false proposition. There is no particular. There is only a universal there. To be independent, we study. Like the scientists, we have some means by which to study. This notion, it's like, to be independent, we study. That's a great thing to remember. You know, the watchword of Vedanta is freedom. Freedom means no attachment, no desire, no lack. That's the measure. That's why Vivekananda says that sometimes shocking thing. It's good to be born in a church, but not to die in one. You know, that the temple is a tool. It's not the thing. You know, an image of God in a temple is a thing. It's not the thing itself. That's why we look through it and not at it. That's what Vivekananda says. A very important, very interesting thing he says. He says, if you go into a shrine, you know, and you worship the image and you stop there, you see the image and you're actually worshiping the image. He said that produces karma. It'll get you to heaven for a while, but it produces a karma. He says, instead, what you do to avoid accumulation of any kind of karma, good or negative, you worship through the image. You look through that image at the divinity that is behind it, and to access that divinity through the image, but not the image in and of itself. And keep that in mind about everything. Don't stop at any object in the world. Look through it at the divine. It's an answer to so many of our troubles. As a marvel, there was a grandma who loved her grandson, and went to Thakur and said, I think it was a grandson. It might have been, no, I think it was a grandson. And she was just enamored of her grandson. And she said, whenever I sit for meditation, all I can think of is my grandson. You know, and so you're thinking that, oh gosh, Thakur is going to let her have it good about being attached to her family like that. And boy, he's just going to come down hard on her. Quite the opposite. Thakur says, what's wrong with that? Put his picture on your shrine and worship the divine through his picture, knowing that everything that you love in your grandson is borrowed from the divine behind him, right? And so it's a fantastic, fantastic way of understanding things. That is how you manage living in an unreal world. Whether you realized it's unreal or not, that's the way we manage it, is by not stopping at any object, but looking through that object to learn the wisdom that it represents, to see the face of the divine looking through there, and understanding the attributes of that object that make it attractive are the attributes of the divine, or the things that make it repulsive are the opposite, the assumed non-attribute of the divine. You can ask a question on that later once I figure out what it means. All right, to be independent, we study. Like the scientist, we have to have some means by which to study. We need a teacher because it is impossible to study ourselves by ourselves. Any idea why that would be true? It's also a very important lesson, especially when you take up a philosophy that says that all paths are true and lead to the divine. You start treating religion like a buffet line. You know, you just walk through the buffet and you take all your favorite parts of everything, right? But that's not what that means. You have to have your tradition that you're devoted to, and you can enhance that tradition from all the knowledge of the other traditions, but you hold true to your own path, because you have to dig in one well to reach water, right? You can't just go take a shovel here and a shovel there and walk around. You have to have some focus and some discipline. So this is our means of study, and this is where we pick our tools. We choose our ideal, and we sit down and we do the work, and it will expand to show the wisdom of all things. But in the beginning, we choose our tools and we work hard in that way. It's not impossible to study ourselves by ourselves, because at this point, we don't know who our self is. So who is studying what? You don't know what you're studying, and you don't know who's studying. So good luck. Good luck with getting anywhere, right? It's an ego, and you do not want your ego in charge of your spiritual life. That's one of the reasons that it's necessary to have a guru. It's necessary to have someone who's outside of your ego to tell you the hard truth that your ego won't tell you. Your ego will not tell you that it doesn't exist. Your ego will tell you that it exists, and it will point out to you the number of beautiful ways that it proves that it exists. And then it'll do the one final dastardly thing, is it will say, I am that. Then you're in really big trouble. So this is why he's saying we need a teacher, because it's impossible to study ourselves by ourselves, because we don't know what either one is. We don't know what we're studying, and we don't know who is studying. But you should not make a mistake. You should not take what you have learned with a teacher for you yourself. The study you make with your teacher is a part of your everyday life, a part of your incessant activity. In this sense, there is no difference between the practice and the activity you have in everyday life. Right? There it is, boldly said. There is no end to your practice. There is no boundary to your practice. Your practice is not the hour that you go into the shrine when you get up in the morning. Your practice is your life. Your practice is every action that you make during the day. Your practice is every thought that runs through the mind during the day. Your practice is awareness, and it's constant and unending, and it is the point of your life. It is the reason you live. All right? That's the nature of practice. So to find the meaning of your life in the Zendo is to find the meaning of your everyday activity. That goes a long way. I love that. Listen to that sentence. To find the meaning of your life in the Zendo is to find the meaning of your everyday activity. What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of all of your activity in the day? You know, is it just to gather food, to save up vacation time, to write a program, you know, to build a house? What is the meaning of your life and the meaning of your activity? You see, in what he's presenting here with life as practice, your activity is practice. And it shows you that the mundane or the material reason for your activity will never be fulfilling. That's why we have our midlife crisis. We come to realize we're just shoveling dirt from here to there, no matter what. You know, Swami Prabhupada told me that one time in a beautiful way. I'd been in the monastery, I think 8 or 9 years. I always grab a random number whenever I say that. I want you to know that. So if anybody ever tries to sum up what I was thinking at 1 year of my monasticism, you won't know, because it's just somewhere around 8 or 9 years. I went to him and I told him, Maharaj, I just don't understand the point of this. I said, I'm just a grandiose maintenance man. I said, what about me as a monk? I just clean toilets, I fix roofs, I sweep sidewalks, I wash dishes, I cook lunches, I clean up lunches. I said, I'm just a glorified maintenance man. Why? What is the point of this life? How is it going to end? You know, I look around and that's what all the monks are, just glorified maintenance men. And he was quiet, and I was expecting him to get a little, you know, snippy with me, which I don't know why I would expect that, but I did. But he turned to me and he smiled, and I always see him just wiping his mouth with his napkin like he would always do before he spoke. Wiped his mouth, he turns to me, he said, yes, you are right. I was like, what? What do you mean I'm right? I don't want to be right. If I'm right, I have to leave. I can't do this. He says, no, you're right. But he says, where will you go? What work in this world is not just a glorified maintenance man? And I thought, oh my God, That's absolutely true. We're all just living to maintain. And that's what I understood. You know, what this great soul here is trying to share with us. The meaning of life is not in the mundane perception of activity. It's understanding that activity is practice, and that the meaning of your life is not what you're doing, but how you're doing it. You know, are you doing it to find and study and to touch those deeper gems of the human experience, of this divine experience? Or are you doing it to maintain your appetites? The perspective you choose will definitely determine the quality and the depth of your satisfaction in living. All right. So in this sense, there is no difference between the practice and the activity you have in everyday life. So to find the meaning of your life in the Zendo is to find the meaning of your everyday activity. To be aware of the meaning of your life, you practice Zazen. You sit quietly in the presence every day. You sit quietly within. This is how the purpose of self manifests. This is how you begin to understand your nature. And it's not only your nature, it's the nature of nature that you begin to understand. When I was at Aiji Monastery in Japan, everyone was doing what he should do. That is all. It's actually the best community life you can have. If everybody's doing what they should be doing, that is perfect. So he says, it is the same as waking up in the morning. We have to get up. At Aiji Monastery, when we had to sit, we sat. When we had to bow to Buddha, we bowed to Buddha. That is all. And when we were practicing, we did not feel anything special. We did not even feel that we were leading a monastic life. For us, the monastic life was usual life, and the people who came from the city were unusual people. When we saw them, we felt, oh, some unusual people have come. Well, I tell you, that's the truth. Look at all of you. What a group of unusual people have come. So this is he's saying, you know, spiritual life is just being who you are, but it's knowing who you are so that you can be it. It's not making a proliferating list of who you are and what you are and trying to serve all those different ideas and purposes. It's knowing who you are so that you can be who you are. That's really the sum total of spiritual life. That simple. It's learning who you are so you can be it, right? And not have to go through this constant suffering of being what you're not, of choosing unimportant things to be important, right? To taking up goals that are temporary and take you nowhere, but will feed you a wrong sense of self, a wrong sense of separation, you know, by building up your idea of yourself. I'm a great painter. I'm a great speaker. I'm a great friend. I'm a great man. I'm a beautiful woman. I'm a, you know, whatever all these token things that we run after are and think about ourselves, you serve them, you will always suffer. Ugh. You'll always suffer. So don't suffer. Study who you are and let it manifest. But once I had left Aiji and had been away for some time, coming back was different. I heard the various sounds of practice, the bells and the monks reciting the sutra, and I had a deep feeling. There were tears flowing out of my eyes, nose, and mouth. It is the people who are outside of the monastery who feel its atmosphere. Those who are practicing actually do not feel anything. I think this is true for everything. When we hear the sound of the pine trees on a windy day, perhaps the wind is just blowing and the pine tree is just standing in the wind. That is all that they are doing. But the people who listen to the wind and the trees, they will write a poem or they will feel something unusual. That is, I think, the way everything is. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's saying one thing is better than the other, or if it's just two sides of the same nature. But it would seem to me that it's a great benefit to feel the atmosphere. And at the same time, to feel anything is a warning sign of an existing ego. And so you need that regularity also to diminish that. Interesting. This is a good little paragraph to spend some time on, I think. Those who are practicing actually do not feel anything. I think this is true for everything. When we hear the sound of the pine trees on a windy day, perhaps the wind is just blowing and the pine tree is just standing in the wind. That is all that they are doing. But the people who listen to the wind and the tree will write a poem or will feel something unusual. This, I think, is the way everything is. So it's very true. I don't know, what gels inside for me in this is the presence. When you become aware of the presence, the whispering of the pines becomes sutras. You know, when you become aware of the presence, the lapping of the waves become mantras. It's living in that awareness of life as practice. It's knowing that the meaning is not mundane, that the meaning is infinite and deep, and it's just our nature. And you can only really listen when you're in the presence. The rest of the time, you're not hearing, you're interpreting. Beautiful. It's a beautiful thought. A beautiful thing to sit with there for a while. So to feel something about Buddhism is not the main point. Whether that feeling is good or bad is out of the question. We do not mind, whatever it is, you see, so he's not choosing one or the other. We accept everything. We accept it as it is. We do not mind, we have no aversions, and we don't think anything of it, so we don't have any attractions. We accept things. There's a depth to that, to accepting everything fully, embracing everything fully. We do not mind, whatever it is. Buddhism is not good or bad. We are doing what we should do. That is Buddhism. Of course, some encouragement is necessary, but that encouragement is just encouragement. It is not the true purpose of practice. It's just medicine. When we become discouraged, we want some medicine. When we were in good spirits, we do not need any medicine. You should not mistake medicine for food. You should not mistake your religion for the thing. You should not mistake your practice for the thing. You should not mistake your virtue for the thing, right? You shouldn't mistake anything for the thing, right? It's very important because this is how the ego feeds itself. It mistakes things for the thing, and it becomes proud of having a good practice. It becomes proud of knowing something. It becomes proud of anything. Oh my God, an ego can become proud of anything. You can have the dirtiest big toe in the world and you'll become proud of it. That's the nature of ego. It's always just running around, grabbing any little old thing to prove its existence, because it doesn't exist. And that's a terrible insecurity to face. And it's the root of our problem. It's the reason that things are not satisfying to us, because we're trying to satisfy something that isn't there with something that isn't there. It's a great problem. You should not mistake medicine for food. Sometimes medicine is necessary, but it should not become your food. That's a bad sign. It's funny because it's a direct quote from Swami Prabhupada, but in a very different context. Toward the end of his life, the last few months of his life, I was sitting at the table eating with him. And at that point, I kid you not, he was taking 114 supplements a day. for his cancer, for his condition. 114. I mean, it was just fistfuls of these supplements. And I remember one morning he was in the process of, putting them down, and he stopped and he paused for a moment, became thoughtful, and he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "It seems my medicine has become my food." So in a very different way, he was talking about that the medicine was being given to him in quantities that resembled food. So we should know that medicine is necessary, but it should not become your food. Yes, indeed. So of Rinzai's 4 ways of practice, the perfect one is not to give a student any interpretation of himself, nor to give him any encouragement. If we think of ourselves as our bodies, the teaching then may be our clothing. Sometimes we talk about our clothing, sometimes we talk about our body, but neither body nor clothing is actually we ourselves. We ourselves are the big activity. We are just expressing the smallest particle of the big activity. That is all. So it is all right to talk about ourselves, but actually there is no need to do so. What a gentle way of saying it. It's all right to gossip, but there's really no need to gossip. What a marvelous, marvelous way of saying it. It's that very gentle, somebody would understand fully what's being said, and yet you didn't have to say it. You stated an obvious truth. It's all right to do any of these things. Actually, St. Paul says that in the New Testament. He says all things are lawful, which is a shocking thing, in a Christian scripture, but it's there, even though it's fully ignored by every good Christian. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. That's a good way of seeing things, in your life, because there are many things that your mind and ego will desire and want to have. And if you say, "Oh, you can't have that, you can't have that," it sets up a little bit of a wrestle there. You're gonna go to war, and you're probably, unfortunately, going to lose it. You're probably going to go ahead and have that 9th piece of cake. But the point is, if you go to your mind and say, "Well, yeah, that cake is good. You totally can have it, but it won't be helpful to have it." And if you change the emphasis from whether or not you can have it to whether or not it's helpful, that changes the conversation completely, right? And so in the way that you organize your spiritual world within, is your religion a matter of what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do? If it becomes like that, then you're going to have some pretty tough battles in there and a lot of misery. And eventually you're going to have to identify as a failure because that's where that leads, And so instead of having your comment, your mindset be around, am I allowed to do this or not allowed to do this? Have it be, is this helpful? As a monk in the Ramakrishna order, we've got 2 questions that we've been trained to ask about the things that we do. 1, does this lead to my enlightenment? Right? Is this a virtue? Is this going to take me toward oneness or not? That's one question. And the second question, is this good for humanity? Is this good for the general? Or is it only good for me, kind of thing? And so those 2 questions in your mind, you analyze, live your life like that. So when you sit there and you're looking after having eaten almost the whole cake and there's only 1 slice left and you're thinking, I should probably go ahead and just finish that off. There's no sense just leaving 1 piece of cake there in the kitchen. Instead of thinking like that, think, is this helpful to me to eat this? Does this lead me toward my ideal? Does this lead me toward oneness? And decide, discern carefully, because that nice piece of cake will in fact be expansion. And Vivekananda does say that all expansion is life. But is it the right kind of expansion? Is it helpful expansion? All right. this idea of encouragement too. Swami, like, I keep telling the same stories, but I keep using them in different ways. So be patient with me. But Swami Prabhupada was very careful not to be encouraging in the sense of him being encouraging. He was very careful not to be the Swami in charge. And I've mentioned that he didn't want his picture on the website because he said, God forbid people come here for me, right? And when I asked him why he was always so impersonal with the monks and why he was always so distant, he says, there will come a day when I'm not here. And if you have fulfilled your practice by becoming attached to me and to my teachings, he said, what will you do when that day comes? He said, my job is to get your attachment on the feet of Thakur, and to become nobody in between you and Thakur. So this is our life. This is the nature of learning here. So it is all right to talk about ourselves, but actually there's no need to do so. Before we open our mouth, we are already expressing the big existence, including ourselves. So the purpose of talking about ourselves is to correct the misunderstanding we have when we are attached to any particular temporal form or color of a big activity. It is necessary to talk about what our body is and what our activity is, so that we may not make the mistake about them. So to talk about ourselves is actually to forget about ourselves. All right, so there's a good guide right there. When is it right to talk about yourself? When you're talking about yourself in such a way that it will lead to the forgetfulness of self. So we don't identify with anything manifest, any particular. We don't attach to anything particular. We are always looking for the general, for the presence of God in all things, for our own nature in all things. So we're always discerning, trying not to look and stop at the object itself, but always to look through the object, look through the world, and understand it to be a manifestation of that which stands behind it. And it's that exercise in all things that will lead us to that oneness, and will diminish our attachment and our constant tendency to see objects and to define them as either worthy or unworthy of being desired or being repelled. So we stop doing that. We look through things and not at things. We look through ourselves and not at ourselves. Right? We look through the mind, not at the mind. Oh, it's 10 o'clock, but much further. Oh, yes, we can finish. Dogen Zenji said, to study Buddhism is to study ourselves. To study ourselves is to forget ourselves. When you become attached to a temporal expression of your true nature, it is necessary to talk about Buddhism, or you will think the temporal expression is it, right? So that's the role of these philosophies, that's the role of these sutras and these religious truths, is that they help us not to stop at the object itself, but show us the way to look through it. Because otherwise we'll think that it's real. And if we think that it's real, then ego becomes real. And if ego is real, we should serve it. And we do, and we get lost and we suffer. And we get happy and we suffer, and we get happy and we suffer. We get some pleasure, and then comes the pain. And you just go round and round and round. Which it's all right to go round and round and round, but it's not necessary to go round, round and round. But this particular expression of it is not it, right? So no particular is the thing itself. It's just a particular. It's an idea. And yet at the same time, it is it, right? Because God, that's the thing. The thing is God, but God is not the thing, right? So it's that understanding that God is in all things, but all things are not God, right? God is always extra. There's always the undefined quotient there that you have to consider when you think of the divine. There is no box, even if that box is called everything. Even if that box is called infinite, you cannot put God in it. Right? You cannot put God in it. For a while, this is it. For the smallest particle of time, this is it. But it is not always so, right? You've not always been as you have defined yourself at any given moment. The very next instant, it is not so. Thus, this is not it. So that you will realize this fact, it is necessary to study Buddhism. But the purpose of studying Buddhism is to study ourselves and to forget ourselves. When we forget ourselves, we actually are the true activity of the big existence, or reality itself. When we realize this fact, there is no problem whatsoever in this world, and we can enjoy our life without feeling any difficulties. The purpose of our practice is to be aware of this fact. Wow, this is one of my favorite chapters. What a marvelous set of enlightening ideas there. Yeah. Anybody have any comments?